Welcome to Planning Live with Craig McLaren, who's Scotland's first National Planning Improvement Champion. The presenter today is Karen Hamilton, who's a partner at Brodie's, and I'll be your chair and associate in the Brodie's planning team. So to our guest, as I've said, he's the first National Planning Improvement Champion. The role was established in 2019 under the Planning Act, and Craig took up the post in September 23. We'll go into a bit more detail, I'm sure, about the role, but prior to that, he's got a long history. So he was Director of Scotland, Ireland and English regions in the RTPI. He's a Director of Scottish Centre for Regeneration in Communities Scotland and Scottish Government. Chief Executive of the Scottish Urban Regeneration Forum, Scottish Policy Officer at RTPI, and a planner in the London Borough of Kensington on Thames. He's also a fellow at both RTPI and the RSA, and an academician of the Academy of Urbanism, sat on several boards and is certainly a very interesting character. So I will pass over to Karen to get us underway. Thanks.
Thanks very much, George, for that introduction, and afternoon, everyone, and most importantly, afternoon, Craig. Great to have you with us this afternoon. I feel exhausted just listening to all of that in your extensive back catalogue there. But you've been in post, as George says, for just a couple of months now in the new role, and getting out and about a lot from what I can see and what we've been chatting about. So I suppose, how are you settling in? Just to
it's been
hear
good
from you.
No, it's been really good. There's been a lot of goodwill out there. I think people appreciate the role and what it's trying to do. There's been a bit of, maybe some, not always everybody understanding exactly what the role is, so there's been a bit of work had to be done on that, but certainly in talking to different people across the sectors, there's goodwill, as I said, and they're keen to help and collaborate, and hearing a lot about collaboration, which is music to ears.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure we'll hear more of that as we have our chat today. So you mentioned the role. Not everybody perhaps has a good understanding of what is intended. So maybe that's a good place for us to start. So the NPIC role was created under the Planning Act of 2019, which, as we know, brought in changes to the main legislation. And for the new role, the Act talks about monitoring planning authority performance, and also the giving advice from the coordinator or champion, but it doesn't really say much beyond that, Craig. So perhaps you can outline for us what you see as being the core elements of the role, and perhaps tell us a bit about your priorities over the first 6 months or so.
Well, yeah, no problem at all, Carl. There's probably 3 areas of work which I'm sort of prioritising and thinking about as the key aspects of what I do. The first is establishing a new performance management and improvement framework. As you said, the Act talks about my key role being to monitor planning authorities and to give advice to them and others who see fit on how to improve. And a key part of that is a new performance and improvement framework. So that's the key thing I've been working on, and I can, if you want, tell you a bit about some of the emerging thinking on that later on as well. And I've been doing a lot of talking to different people about that and what that could look like, how it functions, what the process is behind that as well. My second key role is to act as a broker, essentially to try and identify those strategic issues facing the planning service and the planning system. So that sits alongside the work doing with the performance framework directly with planning authorities. I should look at the stuff sort of more on the round. So one of the things I want to do with that is provide that place, that sort of safe space where we can identify through the evidence we find what some of the key issues are we all face. And from there, trying to identify the truths behind them. As we all know, planning is quite contested with different thoughts on what's good and what's bad. So bring people together to do that, and then to try and establish how we can tackle them and what needs to be done with that. And I suppose I should stress, my job doesn't have the powers to go away and tell people or to make sure people do things, but what I have got is a power where I can tell people, as hopefully a trusted source, what I think they need to do. and they'll have the levers to make the changes which are probably required given the evidence which we've pulled together. And the third part of the role is about trying to help people to get better at identifying, sharing, and applying good practice. And there's a lot of that goes on just now, as you all know. It's quite a big job doing something like that, because it's a big cultural issue, I think, with good practice, and that we all talk about it as if it's great and we do it all the time, but we don't. And we need to try and think through how we can embed the idea of bringing out good practice, sharing it, and then thinking about how we apply it in our own circumstances as well. And that requires an infrastructure and a change of culture. So that's my third priority. But at the moment, it's not my big priority. It's more focusing on the performance framework. And I suppose,
Sure.
yeah, and over the 6 months, a large part's been out and talking to people about what I'm trying to do, and getting their views on different things as well, and just try to clarify exactly what I'm trying to do, and hopefully trying to help get the information, the intelligence from people that can inform me in taking forward those 3 roles.
So there's a lot in that, even in terms of with those 3 strands, and as you say, a lot of sort of preparatory work that I guess is your initial emphasis in being able to set up that system, the framework, from which I suppose everything else is going to follow on from. So it sounds like you're going to be very busy, Craig. What resources are you going to have at your disposal? Obviously, you're sitting within the improvement service where loads of great work already takes place, but tell us a bit about the setup that you have there.
Yeah, I suppose it's important to say from the start that the post is fully funded by Scottish Government, and the grant is made to the improvement service. So I'll get support from that in itself. But the immediate resource is me and a project officer. I'm actually advertising for that just now. So if anyone's interested, go along to the My Job Scotland website and think of applying. So that's the immediate resource which we have, certainly for the time being. I will be working closely with others, however. For example, people in the improvement service. One of the good things about being located in that organisation is that there are different people doing similar improvement work across different services across the local government, who are developing different tools and different thoughts and ideas and different supports, which I have been shamelessly stealing thoughts and ideas from on as well, or thinking about how we can use them, because many of them will be generic in terms of the big issues we face as well. So the support I get from the improvement service colleagues is really important. But I have worked with and have worked closely already with people in heads of planning. I've been to a lot of people in the private sector as well. I'm trying to make this as collaborative as we possibly can make it. And that's there's a bit of altruism in that, but there's also something about how I can get the support from other people to try and help us to take this forward.
Absolutely, and I think it's just the very nature of what you're setting out to achieve that it's going to be very much dependent on all of that sort of stakeholder input, which as you highlight, and that being part of what you're doing at the moment, and trying to reach out to everyone across the system. So, Craig, you perhaps already touched on that, just in terms of the levers that are available to you, maybe the levers that aren't going to be available to you, and we might come back to that, but there was perhaps some concern expressed when the role was first proposed about it becoming or being seen as another stick with which to beat up planning authorities. It's Craig. Are you still there, Craig? And I'm sure you don't see it that way, but what will your approach be?
I think that's maybe where some of the confusions come from, Karen, about what the role is. And I think if you look back to the initial draft bill, which was published, the draft planning bill, it did have some fairly sort of strong provisions within it. And we also had at the time with the penalty clause, where ministers could actually affect they could decide what planning fees planning authorities had depending upon performance, and that was all stripped out as the bill proceeded through Parliament. And as I said earlier on, the provisions are in there now. There's only really 2 provisions in the Act about this and about performance generally. There is now the fact that planning authorities now have to publish a report on their performance on an annual basis. They have been doing it already for 12 years, as many of us know, through the planning performance frameworks, but that was a voluntary thing. So this is now something they have to do mandatory. it also talks about a new approach being developed to make that work, which is exactly what I'm working on. And the second thing was my role, as we've touched on, and the fact that my role essentially is to support or to monitor planning performance and support planning authorities and others to improve. So I don't have a big stick. I've got no sanctions, and I'll be honest with you, I'm quite pleased about that. I think it would probably set the wrong tone, and I think because we have to do this in a very, very collaborative way. And so what I've been saying is I've got two powers. I've got the power of communication, and I've got the power of convening. And that means, as I said earlier on, when I do my annual report, or I give reports to people, or I talk to people, there are things that I can say based from the evidence I've gathered, which they will take seriously, and they will then pull the levers which they have to pull to make the change happen on that. And that could be directed towards a planning authority, it could be directed towards Scottish Government, it could be directed towards the applicants. I don't know as yet, to be honest with you. So I think that's the key way of work. So that relies upon me having to work in a very collaborative way. And as part of that process, be that critical friend, but do that in a constructive and a positive way, and try and shift the focus in some ways towards how we actually deal with those issues and how we can improve and what we need to do to attain those targets.
So very much building on those trusted relationships, and as I think you were, as you mentioned at the beginning, having a firm evidence base for the various steps that are taken along the way, which of course is always important in the planning system. So you've been out and about speaking to, as I understand it, the majority of planning authorities you've managed to get out to already, Craig, since you started in the role. So what kind of reception are you getting where you're having those early conversations?
Very positive. There's lots of people wanting to talk to me, and apologies to those people that's going to have to get back to us yet, but there's lots of interest in the role, but very constructively as well, and people want to engage constructively on that. I think people recognise the scale of the challenge, which is good. That suits me because it is quite a challenge, to be honest with you. And particularly, I've talked to, I think it's about 26 planning authorities in the last 12 weeks. And
it's no mean feat.
It's been really good, and they've all been really keen to chat. And the ones I haven't chatted, it's not because they're ignoring me, it's just we haven't been able to manage things as yet. So I think there's a real keenness to see how we can improve what we've got already. So the planning performance frameworks have been useful tools, but I think people realise that there's still a change needs to be made, and we can maybe talk later on about some of the shifts we want to try and bring into that as well. But building upon that and working constructively. And I think a couple of things have really shone through for me. One is everybody's keen to collaborate. They're all saying that we need to collaborate, and I've held a number of workshops as well recently. And collaboration has been a key theme in that, across sectors, across organisations, within organisations as well. That is exactly what I want to hear as well. And I suppose the other thing which is really coming through, and everybody I talk to, is the issue of resourcing and how it itself is becoming a performance issue. And that's something we want to try and look at and recognise and see how we can take that forward.
Yes, we're certainly never far away from talking about resources when it comes to planning and looking at the changes that are needed. So yeah, certainly that is going to be one of the challenges, because it touches so many areas of the system. But coming back then to the performance management framework, given it's such an important sort of building block from which everything else will be launched. So can you tell us a bit more about your vision for this? You've mentioned the system that's in place at the moment, where that sort of self-assessment and kind of marking by the ministers takes place. How are you thinking at this early stage that things might work, and where that change of emphasis will be from the current framework reporting?
Yeah, I think based upon the discussions I've had with the range of people, not just heads of planning, but with the people involved and with a stake in the system, there's probably a number of shifts we want to try and make, and we're exploring how that can be done. Some of them include moving away from this idea of self-assessment marking, as you say, by Scottish Government, and doing something which is more based upon critical analysis, constructive challenge and assessment. So trying to shift away from that. And in doing that, don't just focus as we do just now on the markers which planning authorities get already, red, amber, green, and just thinking about that, to shifting it to using that to inform how you can improve. So it's a shift towards action on improvement rather than just thinking about performance, using that as an enabler for that as well. I think the other thing we're looking to do is see how we can perhaps measure some of the outcomes which planning delivers, not just some of the outputs and inputs, which is a lot of the things we measure just now are the things which are easy to measure. So it's trying to think about that in a bit more of a, a sophisticated way as to how we can see what planning's trying to contributing to some of the big picture things as well. That is difficult because it means thinking about qualitative measures as well as quantitative measures, which bring their own issues in terms of, one, trying to identify how you can do that, and two, sometimes there's a bit of subjectivity within it as well. So we're looking at how we can make that work as well. I think the other thing I mentioned earlier on was resources. And for me, there's something about trying to recognise the resources as an important aspect and an important influence on performance. The way in which the planning performance frameworks work just now, they tend to just look at the planning service and not think about the different people and organisations it depends upon to make its function work effectively. So I'd like to see if there's some way which we can build that into the process as well. And one of the things I'm looking towards is thinking more about what are the key things which make a planning service effective. So what are the component parts of that? And I'm developing some thinking on that. I've asked that question in the call for ideas as well, and there's about 50 or 60 responses to that so far. So I think that's a really interesting one, and how we can link that into the outcomes we're trying to achieve, which are set out in the NPF.
Great. So we can perhaps pick up in more detail just on where you've got to in the call for ideas at the moment, because as you say, and I know you've had questions out there for people to come back to you on, and I think in fact we shared those questions in the invitation to today's session, which generated some additional responses for you. But listening to you describe where we may be moving to in terms of the new framework, it very much feels like less of an emphasis on the numbers and much more of a sort of qualitative process. There often can be that feeling that when we're focusing on targets, timescales, they can become perhaps a bit of a tick box exercise, Craig, and that those targets, as we see in lots of sectors, not just planning, but can in themselves generate some poor behaviours sometimes where people are worried about the numbers coming out in a certain way, ultimately, leading to poor decisions or inefficient processes, or just a poor experience of the system, where officers perhaps may feel under pressure to be getting to a certain result, but not concentrating on that overall outcome. So I mean, I think this will be music to people's ears, but as you also say, we're not just focusing on the role of the local authority in all of this, it's all of the other players in the system. And I suppose there's maybe a question there as to how much influence and engagement you'll be having with those other parts of the system. So you mentioned statutory consultees, but will that then be part of your sort of ongoing conversations, that you'll be trying to reach out to each of these different parts or each of the players in the system?
Absolutely. I've been trying to articulate what I do in a way it's about the whole system. And the different roles and different stakeholders have within that. So that means I have to talk to everyone who's got that stake, to be honest with you. So I have already been talking to people across different sectors. I've obviously been talking to heads of planning, as I've said, but I've also been talking to people in private sector, some of the umbrella groups there, Homes for Scotland, Scottish Property Federation, for example, and telling them about things as well. There's also, I report to the high level group in planning performance, and there's a subgroup of that which is called, I think it's called the applicants subgroup, which comprises of these different organisations. they're an important part of my stakeholder group, and I need to talk to them and get them on board as much as anything else as well. For me, there's a really important thing about this whole process, in that there has to be confidence in it from the users of the system, not just the people who run the system as well. And I know heads of planning understand and appreciate that as well. So I need to make sure that we can make that work. And I will be continuing conversations with people. Part of the call for ideas is to try and get beyond the usual suspects as well.
Yep.
And get people to have their views on that. So yeah, absolutely. It's the whole of the system, the whole of the stakeholder. My biggest issue again is just having the time to talk to everyone. I've
Yes.
going to focus some of that probably more on the umbrella-based organisations to start with.
Well, it's a good way of capturing those voices in a single place, isn't it? But coming back to one of the strands being shared good practice, Craig, we need to always keep reminding ourselves, whatever sort of however we fit into the system, that good practice is something that we all need to worry about. And I think it's often easy for us to point to others operating in the system and have views about how they may be operating in the system, but we all, I think, perhaps need to look at ourselves from time to time in all of that too. So,
I just had we've had a few questions in, but I thought I'd raise one at the moment. Going back to the proposed framework, someone's asked, have you, in considering it, are you aware of other national or international examples, and kind of, if so, kind of, have you seen any emerging issues in those examples you might have looked at, or is that still too early days?
I have been trying to look at other practice. I looked at the practice in England and Wales, which, no disrespect, but I don't think they're what we want or what we need, to be honest with you. The English system one is very based upon a penalty approach in many ways, or a shift to being on special measures. The Welsh one's quite interesting insofar as it sets out a range of different factors, which I think will be useful, but I think it sort of mirrors what we have just now for the PPFs in many ways. So it's trying to introduce something a bit more sophisticated. I've reached out to a couple of organisations who have a sort of role in this, again in England, but also in Ireland. There's an organisation called the Office of Planning Regulator, which does a much broader role than me, but one of their things is about reviewing the performance of planning authorities and development plans and things like that. I've got links with them through the work I'd done previously with RTPI. I know their chief executive quite well. So we're looking to see if there's some way we can have some form of knowledge exchange in what they've done as well. Another organisation which I think is really interesting is Planning Advisory Service in England, who do a lot more on the good practice and support rather than the assessment. But I think there's lessons to be learned there. And there are some interesting things happening in England around resourcing just now, which I think we could learn from. And the other thing I'm trying to look at, to be honest with you, is other improvement functions in Scotland, and not necessarily dealing with planning, but there's lots of organisations out there who do this sort of work. Public Health Scotland's one, I'll be looking at some of the stuff they do around the place and wellbeing outcomes and the indicators you're developing for them. There's others such as Education Scotland as well, which I haven't contacted yet, but I'd be keen to learn from them. And I think through my colleagues in the Improvement Service, as I said earlier on, there's a lot of knowledge, expertise, understanding, which I will milk as much as I possibly can.
Brilliant stuff. And I think perhaps slightly linked to that in terms of getting as much expertise as possible. In terms of how do planning practitioners get involved in the various stakeholder groups and forums you perhaps mentioned today, or is that something that's beyond?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I launched the call for ideas was to want to get the role out there, if I'm being honest with you, so people could understand what I'm trying to do with it, but also to get that engagement going. So one of the things I want to do with the call for ideas, there's probably two things actually I want to do with the call for ideas. One is it's going to help me and inform me in how I can take forward the performance improvement framework, which I've talked about. And there's been a lot of discussion around that and the responses I've got and in the workshops I've held as well. So there's lots of intelligence and ideas and expertise I can glean from that and use. So that's one thing I want to do with it. But the other thing I want to do with it is I'll publish a summary of what I have received sometime in the new year. I'm not giving you a month yet, because I think so maybe catch you come in. But I'm hoping what that'll do it will give us a sort of foundational piece, which gives us a set period in time what we thought the challenges were facing the planning system, the planning profession, the planning services in Scotland, and almost an agenda for seeing the type of things we want to change as well. And I will want to see if I can track that in many ways to see if we actually are dealing with those things, if things get better or worse. So it's something I'd like to think we can have there, which we can go back to. And as part of that, as much as I can within the resource base which I have, I do want to try and make this a conversation. So there might not be lots of formal mechanisms in place, but I am going out and talking to different people about what I'm doing. I'm in individual meetings, I'm speaking at things like this to try and get the message out there as well and to get some responses back. So I haven't got any clear idea yet as to what a formal mechanism will look like, but certainly trying to keep that conversation, that dialogue going is incredibly important.
Brilliant, thanks.
Great. Okay, so on the call for ideas then, and Craig, we've sort of mentioned this a few times already during the conversation, but as most people will know that you'd come out with 3 questions that you'd sort of shared with everyone to gather thoughts, and a number of responses back so far. Are you able to, well, perhaps the easiest thing is just to outline quickly what those 3 questions were, and have you had the time yet to identify some early themes coming through in terms of, you know, where the likely focus may be?
Yeah. The questions were essentially what are the outcomes we need the planning system to deliver, and what the impact can be of that. And the second one was going back to things I've said already, was what makes a high performing planning service. And then I liked that the really difficult one, which probably people haven't really answered, is how we measure that.
Measurement, absolutely.
Yeah. So there are. I've been reading through things that are coming through. I said there was about one year there was maybe about 50 come in, but I'm sure there've been a few more come in since then as well. There's I think this idea of outcomes and high quality development and how we measure that and how we put that at the forefront of what planning's about is something which is coming through again from all sectors. People want to see us create great places for people, which is not bad as well. Another interesting thing that's come out is customer care and communication. Certainly, some of the stuff in the media recently, I think, was about some feelings, particularly from people in the private sector, that wasn't as good as it could be within planning authorities. And so I think there's something we want to look at in terms of customer care, how communication works, the relationship between the applicant and the planning authority as well. So that's something which is coming through quite strongly, to be honest with you.
And remember from my own days, Craig, in a local authority, from time to time people would get sent on a customer care course, but whether those still run.
Yeah, and I think COVID's been a big issue, which has influenced that as well. But and I think one of the things is the PPFs don't really cover that in a rigorous way, so there's maybe something to look at as part of that. I think there's a big thing about the confidence of the planning system, and the confidence of planners and the ability for planners to do the job they want to do. And as part of that, there's issues around staff morale in planning authorities. There's issues around abuse. I'm getting a lot of that in as well, but people worried about planners and what they're doing and how we can maybe look at that as well. And another really interesting one, which I think is coming through, is the discussion about time versus the time to process a planning application versus the outcome and quality. I think what's emerging is many people are saying it's not just about doing stuff within a set time period. It's the which developers and applicants want. It's the certainty as to what that time frame will be. It doesn't have to be the 2 or 4 months necessarily, but if there's some form of project management process or some clear indication as to when the decision will be made, that's probably more preferable than just the timescales which are set in statute. I think there's stuff in there about proportionality in terms of the asks, in terms of information for planning authorities, and that's both from planning authorities and from the applicant side as well, because I think things seem to have grown and grown and grown. One of my workshops talked about a wheelbarrow of information, which perhaps some of the issues as well.
It's possibly, well, probably fair to say that NPF 4, I think whatever people make of it, has only added to that burden across a range of topics. So certainly very, very topical at the moment, Craig.
And the NPF as well actually is one of the big issues, because we're at an interesting period where we're all sort of trying to grapple with what it all means for us, how we interpret it, and how we deal with it. That's becoming an issue as well. As to whether we have to think about what happens beyond that settling in period, what that means, I don't know, but it's certainly been raised as an issue. So there's just some of the things off the top of my head which people are saying, but there's lots of others as well.
Yes, and I was in a meeting just the other day where someone was remarking that, you know, applicants have obviously focused on their own interests most of the time, but it's, you know, we all have to remember that the challenges that NPF4 is presenting in terms of how certain things have to be addressed and all the rest of it are just as much a challenge for planning authorities and for officers, and you know, and any support that can be given is really needed there, just as much as anywhere else. But I mean, a lot of that is very much to do with the people in the system, Craig, from you know what you've outlined there in terms of morale, customer care, communication. So yeah, there's certainly going to be a lot to get your teeth into. One thing that did occur to me, and I don't know if you have any knowledge of where things are on this, or just if it's an issue that has been coming up, but thinking about you know, the system and procedures and timings, things seem to have been a little bit quiet on e-planning and the improvements that we may be expecting to come through from Scottish Government. But I wonder if you see that being a big part of you know, where work is going to be going in the future, because I expect planning authorities are keen to see those improvements coming through.
Yeah. Personally, I see digital planning as having enormous potential for the system and the service generally. And I think there's things it can do to provide some efficiencies, which can mean reinvestment within the service as well. I think things around how the services are provided, how you communicate and work with one another. And one of the big things I think particularly is data and spatial data. And I've been talking to colleagues in the improvement service about that and how we can try and make that work. So yeah, it is enormous. In fact, one of the things which is in my head about a high performing planning authority is, are planning authorities making the best of this? Because that relies upon a lot of what's going on in Scottish Government just now. So, and I do think planning authorities do realise, understand and recognise that digital is the way forward. But I think there's a wee bit to go on how that's all going to be implemented. There's a wee danger as well with digital that you lose the personal touch, which we have to think about if customer care is one of the things we've been discussing as well. But I'm confident we can strike a balance on that, absolutely. But yeah, the potential is enormous and can add so much more. And I genuinely think it can probably change the public's view of what planning is, because we can present it as a much more exciting, much more sexy, dare I say, way of doing stuff as well.
Yep.
And attract a younger group of people to join the profession.
And I know when we were speaking earlier, one of the points that you made was that you were very keen that this area of work and the focus on performance, at the end of the day, you have to be mindful of not adding to the burden of what local planning authorities are having to deal with, particularly with the resource challenges, that, you know, staffing personnel issues and all the rest of it. But, you know, perhaps that's where digital planning can help in all of that as well, in terms of some sort of, you know, the automated elements of what they're going to have to do. Okay, well, if we can perhaps then turn the conversation towards delivery in terms of your own performance, Craig, and if you can explain to us a bit more about just how that will work. I mean, you've mentioned that coming back to reporting, and that you yourself will have reporting to do, and you know, some of the initial things that you're going to be looking at. But can you just talk us through who it is that you will be reporting to, and how that will be, I suppose, you know, monitored in terms of what this new system is achieving?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to say from the start that I'm trying to practice what I preach, and I am working away on building some KPIs for myself, sort of performance and improvement. metric for that as well. It's only just begun, but I think it's important to commit to that. In terms of, I'm also, as part of that, I'm trying to build a 3-year plan which sets out the outcomes I think we should try and achieve during that period. So in terms of reporting, I mentioned the roles fully funded by Scottish Government by grant and sits within Scottish Government. So there's a reporting aspect to that and delivering the deliverables which are set out in there. The key group which I have to talk to on a regular basis is the high level group in planning performance, and that's chaired by the Planning Minister, Joe Fitzpatrick, and COSLA, and it's the chair of the Economy Committee, Councillor Gail McGregor. But it comprises other organisations, so you've got Scottish Government, COSLA, Heads of Planning Scotland, RTPI, Solace, the Key Agencies Group, and this local authority lawyers group as well. So that meets on a quarterly basis, and the next meeting of that's in December. And I'll be taking to them a concept paper for the new approach to the performance improvement framework as well. I also have internal things within the improvement centre. I'm actually speaking to our board tomorrow about the role and what we're trying to do to get their input into it, which is quite neatly timed, which is all very good. So I report to the head of transformation, performance and improvement within the and the chief executive within improvement service as well. So yeah, there's lots of different aspects to it, but it's probably the high level group is probably the essential one. And as I said earlier on, underneath that sits the applicant group, so that brings in that other side of things as well. So it's trying to keep them on board, on side as we can, and fingers crossed everything seems to be going okay so far.
Great. George, are you wanting to bring any further questions at this stage? I see there's a few on the list, or
yeah, we've covered a couple in the discussion already about data, etc. The one I suppose is a helpful one was obviously it's funded by Scottish Government. Has the Minister for Planning kind of set out what he would like the system or to improve or focus on at all, or are you looking more down in terms of kind of those more involved in the system day to day?
I think the plan is, I've talked to the Minister on a couple of occasions and set out some of my thoughts on how we take this work forward. I think the Minister and the high level group more generally, I want to use me as the impetus for having discussions as to what the issues are at the moment. So I think through the work of the new planning improvement framework and what will come out from there, the Minister and everyone else will be involved in that and will be engaged in what the results of that are and what needs to improve. And similarly with the work I'll be doing on that more strategic level side of things as well. So I'll be reporting these things back to each meeting of the high level group. I think probably an important aspect of that, George, will be the fact I have to publish an annual report. I'm obliged by statute now to do that. So that annual report I see as being quite an important part of my communication function, which I talked about earlier on, in trying to lay out what the challenges are from the evidence we've gathered from the new performance framework and from other conversations I have with stakeholders through evidence and research which has been gathered as well, but also as part of that trying to identify how we deal with those challenges and who should be taking what forward to make that happen. So that annual report I think could be a really useful document for everyone in setting out what they are, and hopefully we'll get everyone on board to see how we can actually tackle and deliver on those challenges.
And a slightly separate one. Going back to the call for ideas, you said you've had about 50 responses. Has there been a balance between kind of local authority responses and kind of those like planning practitioners and developers, or has it been more developer side? What's kind of the balance if you're aware? Obviously, they're still coming in.
Yeah, well, they're coming in. My phone's buzzing, so I'm assuming that's stuff happening as well. From what I saw, there is a bit of a mix, to be honest with you, which is good. There's also some community aspects in there, some different interest groups as well, putting forward some of their thinking. So yeah, so there seems to be a wide range, and I'll set that out in my report when I publish it in the new year as well, so we get a clear idea as to where these messages are coming from.
Yeah, brilliant.
Good. Okay, well, it's maybe just a good time for us to wrap up. Craig, just keeping an eye on the time, but if we can maybe just finish up with the last question. If you were to come back to speak to us on Planning Live in a year's time, where would you hope to be with all of this?
Good question. As I say, I'm still working on what my 3-year challenge is, but I suppose this time next year, I would firstly still like everybody to be talking to me. And I don't mean that they're falling out. I mean the conversation is continuing,
Yes.
the dialogue is continuing, and hopefully that idea of collaboration is a key component of that. So that's a really strong message I'm getting across the board. So if we can continue that conversation and do that in a collaborative way, I think that would be really important. And in a functional way, I would like to think that we are starting to pilot and learn from a new national planning improvement framework. So my plan is to see if we can push some of that out for the next financial year and build in learning episodes to that as well. And I suppose the other thing, and probably in a more in a big picture way, is just that perhaps we start to see people more and more embedding the idea of measuring their performance, but building upon that to improve, becoming a whole part of what they do. It's an embedded function. It's not seen as the add-on. If we get some way towards doing that, I'll be really pleased.
I think that sounds like a very positive message for us to finish up on. So, well, we wish you every luck with the role, Craig. It sounds like you're off to a flying start with it. So I will pass over to George now just to wrap up. And
yep, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Craig. Thank you, Karen. That was really interesting. Just a reminder to everyone that the call for ideas closes today. So if you have any last minute ideas after this, I think you've got to get your skates on. But as Craig said, he's willing to listen. So yeah, do get your ideas in. And we've obviously had several questions, and we haven't touched on all of them. So feel free to, I suppose, put them as a submission to call for ideas if you need. So yeah, thank you very much for joining as a guest and also as a presenter today. And the reminder for our next session, because this is the last one of 2023, will be I believe the 25th of January 2024. But keep your eyes peeled for invites coming in. The speaker is to be announced on that one, I think. But thank you very much for everyone for joining. I'm begrudgingly, even though it's November, going to say have a good Christmas and we'll see you in the new year. Thanks.
thanks.